Dr. Porges, how are you?
Fine. Nice to be with you, Michael.
Oh, it's so good. First, I want to say congratulations on your body work. And it has been just a real treat to be challenged by your work. And because when I was in graduate school, the theory, your theory, was not well established or even well known. And so they were still calling the vagus nerve the wandering nerve.
Oh.
And so here we are. What a treat.
Well, it's all about the lens that you look at life through. If you look at things as anatomical structures, you're missing the whole story. If you think of it as the vagus is amazingly uh, nerve that is the largest nerve in the body going through from the brain to all the organs. If you view it as a cable that is a surveillance system that's really assessing how your body's doing, sending signals to the brain, the regulator, and then regulating those organs. But it's a different lens than saying nerves do things, organs do things. We have to think in terms of a more integrated neural system.
And the reason I wanted to have you on is for just that reason, is that you have changed the game from a physiological standpoint about how many of us understand optimized psychology. And so many people have heard the fight, flight, freeze mechanisms, but to actually understand what is the neurology that sits underneath of it, I think is materially important. So I want to talk about that. And I also want to talk about how you became you, meaning a person who's disrupted the field and added significance to it. And I'm talking about human flourishing, not just like sport and optimization. So can we start with something as a flyover?
Sure.
If there was a handful of chapters that would capture your life, right? Your entirety of your life, what would those chapter headings be?
Well, I couldn't give you the headings. I'd give you the theme. And the theme is my work is who I am. And if we approach life in that way, where we can enable our work to be an expression of our who we are, I mean our core, not merely our passion, but our core, then it's no longer work. It's a personal experience of growth, and more than that, it's an experience of connection with others. If your work is what it is to be a human being, then it's all about your work is about connecting with humanity. And I'm
Mm.
going to translate it into your terms. It's all about enabling humans to flourish because they don't flourish unless they are able to connect with others.
Okay, I'm right there with you. And I've got an axiom that I've worked on just to back you up on this thought is that um, through relationships we become. And so that's meant to be open-ended, but it is the relationships with ourselves, with others, with Mother Nature,
Mhm.
with mistakes, with successes. It is through the relationships that we become who we're becoming.
Yeah, I would even push it even further because we have people who talk about spirituality as if it were not a relationship. And so you end up with a bifurcation in the world of spirituality. Those that reach a level of spirituality through connection with others, and versus those who in a sense, uh, reach connectedness with an abstract concept, a deity, which is much more dissociative and has with it, as we become more dissociative, we're really saying as we become separated from other, we lose all the attributes that social interaction gives us. When you asked about the flyover, it's actually something that's really coming into my mind about what is all this body of work. It's all about acknowledging that we're the product of an evolutionary process of a vertebrate that became social. That's who we are. So our sociality is not distinct from our neurobiology, and our sociality is not distinct from our health. And in your terminology, our sociality would not be distinct from flourishing as a human being.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And would you say right now, I'm going to pull out of science and philosophy for a minute and just ask you about when you think about the human condition. Let's just
Mhm.
do the states for a minute because we're both in the United States of America. How do you capture the human experience? Are we flourishing? Are we struggling?
Oh, we're primitives because we violated the mandate of what it is to be a social species, and that is to be connected with each other. And everything we're doing is about separation. And if you want to reflect on something, ask yourself or ask others, or I would say you might get the wrong answer. Don't ask them, but kind of intuitively guess what their answer would be. Are they good witnesses of others?
Mm.
Okay, and then you start asking the question, when you're asking about, like, in the US, what's going on, and then it's people don't have a voice or feel they don't have a voice. And it has very little to do with retribution. It has to do with identifying oneself as being real. So voices are taken from people, and that is really what creates this marginalization and literally a panic. Because as you take a person's voice away metaphorically, you're isolating them, you're marginalizing them. And we see the impact in the politics and the social consciousness of the country. And the other part of what you see is that you're never going to convince people to be good witnesses or to give voice to others if those people themselves are in a state of threat. If they're threatened, if they're fearful, they're going to be defensive, and being defensive is not to care or even acknowledge that other really exists. So it all becomes proximal self-survival.
Okay. So the witness piece, let's start with the witness and let's go to the voice.
Mhm,
So are we good witnesses of others?
mhm.
And I think you would say, and I want to get right into like a thoughtful definition of the polyvagal theory, but I think you would say that it's hard to witness another when we are constantly, our brain, and in particular, the wandering nerve, the vagus, is trying to figure out if we're safe.
Well, the brain's trying to figure out if we're safe, and our nervous system has certain basic rules that it looks for. One is predictability. One is which means familiarity. But even if we have problems, and we need to be able to be led on a journey of problem solving, not of chaos. And as a country, we've lived through the past few years have been very chaotic in the predictability. And the pandemic, of course, creates this uncertainty in people's lives. It still is. And we're not even witnessing what's going on. We're not truly witnessing that the pandemic in itself creates a chronic state of threat to our nervous system, to our body, to our health, and for many people, to their financial security. And it's a real threat. And we are using terms like pre-existing conditions, like if you're obese or your heart condition, as being a vulnerability to the virus. And we're neglecting uh, the history, the clinical history of the individual. Like, have they been traumatized? Have they been raped? Have they come from impoverished environments? Has their nervous system already been retuned to be defensive long before the pandemic occurred? And then the pandemic is just that second blow to a vulnerable system. And it can't fight off. The immune system says, enough.
I read a statistic today that it was 40%, just under 40% of people during the pandemic have put on 29 pounds of weight, when 10% have put on over 50 pounds of weight. And so if you think about the stress response,
Mm, yeah.
this makes some kind of sense, right? Because
Yeah,
if we're
right.
stressed, we search for.
If we throw out the word stress
Mhm.
and replace it with a simple word, a simple description, say our body is under a state of threat, then you start understanding what your body, your nervous system is doing. When people say you're stressed out, it almost implies that you have agency or empowerment not to be stressed out. So we, in a sense, blame those who have already been victimized by the environment. So if we have a better understanding that our nervous system detects cues and shifts bodily state, even to either from a state of accessibility, welcoming, friendship, and co-regulation, or to a defensive, self-oriented, I have to live preservation mode. And this is what we call being stressed out, and this is what we call being calm. So we have multiple layers in which we're making interpretations of a simple let's say, simple script or a simple reflexive program that is outside the level of awareness. And that is, are we safe or are we under threat? And our nervous system has literally packages of responses. If it's safe, we're like this. If we're not safe, we're like this. And this symbolically means I'm not open to you. And when you try to engage me, you're still a threat. So I'm going to push you back.
Yeah. So the two responses are we're interpreting threat or interpreting safety, and our
Yeah.
body is responding accordingly.
Accordingly.
And yeah, and so this would probably be yep, right. And the perception of threat is materially not different than the actual threat, right? So our
Well,
perception of threat, there's the same cascade or the same systems that
yeah,
take
but
place.
you see, you slipped into a let's say a dangerous area if I use the word perception. Perception, in a sense, implies an awareness. And when you do that, you start giving agency to in a sense, the survivor or the victim of the threat. And the part is so much of our nervous system functions outside of our realm of awareness. So certain cues change our body, and then our big brains with their creativity start to create narratives. And in your life, I'm sure you've had arguments with people that you have no idea why an argument started. Or arguments are never really won. It was that something was going on in the background. People were highly mobilized, agitated, and the threshold to misinterpret a neutral cue or even a positive cue had changed, and someone misinterpreted or took something that you said with the intention, with interpretation that you intended to be hurtful. And what you are seeing is that I call this the intervening variable, what's in between the context of stimulus and our response and our interpretation is our physiological state. And as a performance person dealing with athletes, they often, since they are highly mobilized during athletic exercises, their bodies are really so mobilized they may misread cues of interaction as if they're threatening. So if a person is, in a sense, a high sympathetic, high heart rate, mobilized, then this social component of the autonomic nervous system, that ventral vagal system that's linked with the muscles of the face and head and the intonation of voice, it goes offline. And so if you're, let's say, playing football and someone on the opposing team knocks you down, hits you hard, gets up and walks away, what does your body do? It wants to, in a sense, retaliate. You have fights. But if the person who knocks you down leans over and says, kind of, help you up, it's part of the game. In a sense, the narrative changes. So our body reacts with major changes. And the real issue is, how does our nervous system interpret those reactions?
How does our body interpret those actions as opposed to how does our mind interpret and then our body follows according to our mind?
Yeah, the mind is actually on for the ride. The mind, you have this bodily reaction, and now your mind or your aware part of your nervous system is trying to make sense of it. Now, sometimes the sense fits the reality of the situation, sometimes it doesn't. But to your own awareness, your explanation is always the right one.
Okay, so are you coming into this conversation as a top-down or bottom-up approach? And I think
No,
that you're going to
you
probably say
can't you
you're going to say
can't
both.
right, because
Yeah.
we're a dynamically interactive uh, unit. So let me give you
Okay.
the example. Let's say that over your house, you're on the West Coast, obviously somewhere. You're in Seattle, I presume, or something. Where
Actually, I'm in Hermosa Beach today.
where's that?
Yeah, in California.
Oh, okay. But
Yeah.
let's assume you're in your house, and even though it doesn't occur anymore, a jet plane flies overhead, breaking the sound barrier. Okay, so there's this big concussive sound. Oh, that would be good in California. You think it's an earthquake, which is again the bodily reaction. And if you've been in California and you have felt an earthquake, how does your body respond?
There's a kind of startle response, and
That's
then
right.
so there's a it kicks on.
It kicks on, your body immediately goes into a threat reaction. And then your mind interprets it and say, oh, it's an earthquake. And I've been through those. And, it's kind of natural living there. But if you have a person from the Midwest who's there and they experience that, what does their brain say? The place is going to fall down. So the top down, in your case, if you've had the experiences, down regulates that bottom up threat reaction because you have a history. But if you don't
Okay.
have that history, your mind will support the threat reaction.
I want to take a quick little break here to talk about Aura. Aura is a wearable health tech company that delivers personalized sleep and overall health insights to you to help you go into each day ready and rested. So Aura measures heart rate variability, respiratory rate, skin temperature, and a bunch of other biometrics. And they do this all from your finger. Now, why is the finger important? It's a really good form function. And I sat down with their scientists, and I'm really bullish from a scientific perspective on how they're going about solving this really important feedback loop about how you're doing from a recovery and rest standpoint. And when it comes to tracking HRV, heart rate variability, I want to make sure that I'm getting something that's dependable. And that data is really important to me. One of the reasons HRV is so important is that it's a metric of how your body is recovering from stress throughout the day. And it's basically an evaluator of your overall fitness levels as well as fitness readiness. So having consistently low heart rate variability indicates that your body is not adapting or recovering well from stress. And that's why this is a great little metric for you to look and check into on a regular basis. So I want to encourage you to go check out Aura. And the website is get.auraring.com/finding mastery. So that's get.auraring, OURARING, get.auraring.com/finding mastery. And Finding Mastery is also brought to you by Sakara. Sakara is a wellness company, and they are rooted in the transformative power of plant-based food. When it comes to preparing healthy meals, I'm trying my best. I'm trying to get better at this department. It's really important to me, but I feel like the time and the expertise to create the meals that I want to taste that are also healthy is just right outside my grasp. And so this is why I turned to Sakara. And their menu of creative chef-crafted breakfasts, lunches, and dinners, they change weekly, so you don't get bored. And they're all delivered fresh anywhere in the US. And for me, my go-tos are the breakfast, by the way. They're unbelievable. So Sakara also offers daily wellness essentials like supplements and herbal teas. The herbal teas that they have are really good. I use them on a regular basis after dinner. It's my kind of go-to there. And they're designed to support your nutrition. I'm a fan specifically of their detox tea. And then they've also got a metabolism super powder that you might want to check out. It's made with organic raw cacao, and it works to boost energy, eliminate bloating, minimize sugar cravings, and also reduce fatigue. And so right now, Sakara is offering you 20% off your first order when you go to sakara.com/finding mastery or enter the code Finding Mastery 20 at checkout. SAKARA, sakara.com/finding mastery, or at checkout, use Finding Mastery 20 and you get 20% off your first order. That's sakara.com/finding mastery. And now let's jump right back into this conversation. Even more reason why for me, when I hear that, I go, right, that's why it's so important to have an increased awareness, to get to wisdom, to have many frames of reference, as many frames of reference as we possibly can. And I'm concerned because we are increasingly becoming muted in our stimulus, and so.
Well, separate. There are two things going on. There are things that need immediate reactions too, and there are things that one can, in a sense, think about to make a decision. You were really focusing on the latter. But the startle of an earthquake, or someone hitting their brakes, or someone hitting the horn of their car while you're crossing an intersection, require immediate responses. Your body is going to be jolted, and the question is, you have to move, usually. And then the issue is, how do you make sense of what has happened? In situations where it's more chronic, in the pandemic now is your example of that, there's a chronic threat to people. And how are they processing that? How are they reading their body's cues, which are cues of threat? Are they confabulating a whole narrative of paranoia about the world and other people? So in a sense, the body is supporting defensive behaviors. Or many people have been confined during the pandemic in family units that were not safe to begin with, especially, let's say, adolescent children, children growing up. And how are they processing those experiences? Your example about people gaining weight, ingestion of food is a self-regulatory behavioral pattern that has a agency to it, a voluntary component, and that is ingesting, stimulates the oral motor cavity. This is very polyvagal. And if you don't have social activity, which stimulates the same nerves, you'll eat. It's as simple as that. You'll try to calm yourself by ingesting. In fact, many people who have eating disorders have reduced opportunities for social interaction. So at people who are addicted to various drugs, it's the same thing. They're heroically trying to find a substitute to regulate their physiological state when historically, or let's say evolutionarily, their nervous system regulate threat by interacting with others.
Okay. Okay, brilliant. And I want to start right at the top with you. Can you give a very pedestrian description of the polyvagal theory?
Well, there's a knee jerk for me, and that is the least like question from my perspective.
I would
Uh,
imagine.
but I always like to try to simplify it and get people to think in a different way and say, what does polyvagal theory tell you? It tells you that your physiological state is actually a mediator of how you react to the world. And if you start off there, you say, well, if your body's calm, you become more accessible, you become more sociable. And if your body is highly mobilized, you become more defensive, more fight flight. And if your body's shutting down, and there are many people who, when brought into a social setting or even on the camera, they'll disappear. So that's shutting down. Then with those three states, you can map them into two different uh, trajectories. One is a developmental one. So if you went back to the fetus, you can see that the shutting down response is actually the earliest one. And then the mobilization, and finally the social engagement system, which for the newborn baby is the same system that regulates sucking, swallowing, and vocalizing. And that's why ingestion is calming, singing is calming, breath exercises, engaging. We, in essence, tap into that same system with social cues as opposed to ingestive cues. So that's one trajectory. The other trajectory is to think of evolution. And if you look at evolution, there's something called phylogeny, which is really our evolutionary history. Who were our ancestors? So we're social mammals, and mammals evolved from asocial reptiles. So that's as far as we need to go. So something happened along that evolutionary pathway that enabled asocial reptiles to become social mammals. And that has everything to do with polyvagal theory, because a new part of the vagus evolved, the cardioinhibitory regulated slowed heart rate, but it broke off the older branch and moved over in the brainstem to an area that regulated the muscles of the face and head. So now we regulate our physiology through our social behavior. So our sociality became physiology. It's the same thing.
This
And
this this is remarkable. This is really a remarkable shift, and your eloquence in the way that you have pulled it into a very complicated internal ecosystem is this I love. And I've read enough of your work to to get excited about this point here, which is, we wear our emotions on our face. We
And
wear our,
broadcasted in our voice.
yeah. Okay. So, and the reason is because of where the nerve innervates,
Yeah.
right?
Now, there's another important take home there. You got the side of how we're social, but this system has the capacity to immediately and reflexively downregulate our defenses. So this social part basically is inhibitory over our defenses. Think about a baby who's in a state of panic or crying or tantrum. The mother looks at the baby, smiles, says a few words, or sings a little bit. The baby just, it's the cues of safety are embedded in intonation and gesture and facial expression, and they are stronger than our defenses, our defense systems.
That's remarkable. So that becomes so then our social cueing
Yeah.
is one of the great parasympathetic activators.
Exactly. And I created a term which I called neuroception so that we
Right.
wouldn't have
Yeah.
to use
Yeah.
the word perception. So we could leave it to some unaware neural circuit that reflexively did things. And it can very simply be stated that mammals are the only vertebrates that have a neuroception to detect safety. All vertebrates have a neuroception of danger. And safety is not the same as not having cues of threat. Safety is something special. It's the voice of the mother, it's a smiling friendship, it's the trust that makes us social mammals, social species.
Okay. So when we are sympathetic dominant or highly mobilized in that moment, to use your language, and we scan the world
Hmm.
and we've got an operating system that is looking for danger,
Yeah.
threat,
Hmm.
and we hear a soothing voice and we see the frontalis muscles looking soft and kind and gentle. And we see kind of a doe-eyed expression on somebody, but it doesn't work because there's something else under the system that
Okay.
says this is not trustworthy, this is fake. But really, that person is coming from the right wholesome
Well,
position of
okay.
wanting to create safety.
There's a complexity, and let's actually
Mm-hmm.
play with words a little bit. First, if you're sympathetically dominant and you're there because you have actively withdrawn that ventral vagal calming mechanism, it's really a statement that you have that attribute. You can still re-engage it.
Okay, so when I was saying sympathetic dominant, I'm talking about somebody who's chronically stressed,
That's
overwhelmed,
right.
and they have a pervasive pattern
That's
of
right.
being sympathetic
Right.
dominant.
So you in one situation, the one I'm describing, it's adaptive to be sympathetically dominant. In a sense, to retract that ventral vagus because I need the metabolic output. I need the strength. I need to move. I need to move. But I can regain co-regulation, the attributes of co-regulation, if someone talks to me, if someone looks at me. And this is really the core of what team sports is all about.
1,000%, 1,000%. Yes.
It's a sense you trust your teammates to give you the appropriate cues of when you need to be aggressive and defensive versus when you can now be accessible. So it's a very interesting training plan. There's another group in terms of training, which is a very interesting model, and that is Navy SEALs. Do you know anything about Navy SEALs?
I do.
You know how they train them. You basically almost drown and you get resuscitated by a team member. And what that means is that even the immobilization, death fading reaction of shutting down, you still have confidence that someone's there for you. So you never fall into the abyss. And so they make these very strong bonds. Now, the issue with that is they're bonded with their team, but they may have problems bonding with their family. So many of them, this is actually a quote, if my team is going anywhere in the world, I'll be ready in an hour. Now, about my family, I'd have to think about it. So it's like this, and in fact, when you start getting into team sports, professional sports, for some people, there is that stronger bond within their team versus in their other parts of their social relationships, their families.
And okay, I want to go back to the dilemma I set up. But
Yeah.
on this point, is the suggestion that the reason that bond is so intense,
Mm,
it's bigger than the oxytocin that happens from shared experiences.
yeah.
It's something that happens at the revival of the feigning, of the fake death, if you will, the voodoo
Yeah. Oh,
death, I
well,
think it's
it's a
called, right?
truly vulnerable death. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
It is the life threat.
The near
It's,
death, right?
yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And I would say that the people who develop these training programs have some intuition that this works, and it does work.
Mm. Okay. All right. So now go back to that dilemma that I set up.
The dilemma you set up was that of an individual whose ventral vagal circuit was so withdrawn and depressed that they were living most of their time within a defensive sympathetic mobilization state. And how do you get them back into a social engagement system?
Even when they're seeing another that is like
Yeah,
kind. Yep.
well,
Mm-hmm.
the what I'm learning from the world of trauma is what you're describing are people who often have had traumatic experiences and survived them, and their body says been there, meaning trusted someone at some point in time, won't go there again. But their mental image of what they want in life is to be safe in the arms of another. So their body still, who are protecting them from being injured, their mind says, really, I'd like to have relationships. And that brings them into therapy because they're not happy in the world that they're in, which is everything is threat. So the answer is, how do you reverse that? And how do you get cues of safety now to be cues of giving up defense? I use this kind of a metaphor of a continuum. On one side, it's vulnerability, and the other side, it's accessibility. And therapeutic models are all about enabling people to be accessible without the vulnerability overriding that accessibility. So in a sense, you're taking that risk. It's not an intellectual risk. Your body is saying it's okay. I can give you a hug. Not, we can all see this where children and other adults, when we give people hugs, we know whether they're authentic or not. There are people who will give you a hug and you feel like it's a steel, fence that you're grabbing because their bodies are tense. They're not safe in that level of proximity, and they don't feel that they have, and I will use the word agency, that they are, in a sense, allowed to express how they really feel, that this is distasteful and uncomfortable for them. So they overlay a social acceptability of giving people hugs. And we also see this where people will make eye contact and they're really kind of makes them feel uncomfortable and their faces are not showing expressivity. So the first part is that sympathetically dominant is the critical part is the ventral vagus is withdrawn and all the features that we call social engagement are gone. So the facial expression is flat, the voice lacks intonation, the body has rigidity. So they're broadcasting to others, stay away from me, and they see in others as people that could hurt them. So we see the synergism developing, that they're detecting cues, uh, misreading cues of approach, reflecting them out, and then when a person who's approaching gets those cues, forget it. They're not going to give any more cues of approach. Their bodies know that this is not safe to go towards. So the issue is, how do you move that person through with methods of therapy, and that is titration, slow, a greater body awareness, giving the clients toolkits to regulate their physiology, such as breathing tools, because if you exhale slowly, the ventral vagus comes back on. And when people try to maintain their defenses, they shift their breathing patterns to have uh, short exhalations and longer inhalations. But if you want to come down, you take a short inhalation and a long exhalation. So we can actually have this portal to regulate our physiology.
And let's talk about just be precise with the vagus coming back online.
Yeah.
Is that what you're talking about? If I hear it correctly, that what the vagus nerve does, it becomes it becomes the brake, if you will, for the sympathetic nervous system.
It downregulates sympathetic. The
Yeah.
ventral vagus does that. It basically I would use the term it contains it,
Contains
because
it.
the
Okay.
healthy individual wants sympathetic tone because that gives you energy and exuberance. So you want a person to be activated, but you want them contained with their sociality. So you want, so let's say dance and play are examples of movement with social engagement, and that's what you want.
The science of breathing is coming online in a rapid form right now. And I'm curious if you're mapping any of the cadences of breathing that you're finding to be more precise than a long exhale. And there's some good research, but I'm just not sure if you're following it.
There's a physiology underlying, whether we call it breathing therapies or yoga breath or pranayama yoga. There's a neurophysiology, and there are people working on that. But there's certain basic rules of how the nervous system works. And many of these traditions of breathing therapies, even the ancient traditions, are really, in a sense, intuitively based on good science, whether they knew it or not. And
Mm-hmm.
that is the impact of that ventral vagus on the heart, which is easy for us to understand and measure because it slows your heart rate up when that vagus is working. And that occurs during exhalation. So basically, the breathing is a gating of the impact of the vagus on our heart, to the heart's pacemaker. So slow exhalations enable the vagus to have more of a profound inhibitory effect on our heart and also on the other aspects of the sympathetic nervous system. It calms us down. Much of the work also deals with abdominal breathing, pushing down on the abdomen and the diaphragm. And one can conceptualize those as amplifiers of slow exhalation because there's lots of sensory cues coming from the diaphragm. So there's a neurophysiology for every breathing pattern. And some of the people who do really great work with breathing programs, it's not all about calming down. It's about using breath to energize. So you, in a sense, go on journeys through your body and you start to appreciate these shifts in physiological state. In a sense, you become an experiencer of your own polyvagal states. You can shut yourself down, you can mobilize, and you can become very accessible. And as you do that, you are, in a sense, becoming you're honoring your own body, you're becoming aware of your own body. And it's not only that you're, in a sense, becoming healthier, but you're also learning tools of self-compassion. You're allowing yourself to calm down.
Okay, I want to take a quick little break here to talk about 8 sleep. What happens throughout the night is that our body temperature changes. And body temperature change can also affect circadian rhythm. It can affect sleep quality. And so what 8 sleep has done is basically they've solved this. The average mattress actually absorbs your body heat and it gives you like those nasty night sweats, causing that restlessness and that kind of just wakefulness that takes place. And they figured out like, wow, okay, mattresses have not been properly engineered with some technology for years. And so what they do is they pair dynamic cooling and heating with biometric tracking. How good is that? So the temperature of the Pod Pro, that's the name of their product, it adjusts each side of the bed based on your sleep stages, based on your biometrics, and based on your bedroom temperature. And all of that is reacting intelligently to create the optimal sleeping environment for you. So it comes in both a form of a mattress or a cover that you can put on your existing mattress. And I just got the mattress cover for my son, and he's loving it. It's easy to install, and in a matter of minutes, you have a temperature-controlled bed. You can sleep as cool as 55 degrees Fahrenheit or as hot as 110 degrees Fahrenheit. I want to encourage you to go check it out. So go to 8sleep.com/finding mastery to check out the Pod Pro and save $150 off at checkout using the promo code Finding Mastery. Again, that's 8sleep, and you spell it EIGHT, sleep.com/finding mastery. And Finding Mastery is also brought to you by Coinbase. If you've thought about entering the world of cryptocurrency, but felt a little overwhelmed, Coinbase makes learning to buy and sell simple. So Coinbase offers a trusted and easy to use platform to buy, sell, and spend cryptocurrency. So they support the most popular digital currencies on the market and make them accessible to everyone. They offer portfolio management and protection, learning resources, and a mobile app so you can trade securely and monitor your crypto all in one place. Millions of people in over 100 countries trust Coinbase with their digital assets. So whether you're looking to, diversify or just get started, or searching for a better way to access crypto markets, you can start today with Coinbase. For a limited time, new users can get $5 in free Bitcoin when you sign up today at coinbase.com/finding mastery. Again, that's Coinbase, COINBASE.com/finding mastery for $5 in free Bitcoin. The offer is for a limited time, so be sure you sign up today. That's coinbase.com/finding mastery. And with that, let's get right back into this conversation. Okay, so that's a nice stitch over to agency, because that is actually one of the definitions of agency, if you will. So how do you think about agency?
Well, I think of it, in my mind, as two separate things. One is disruption of agency, and the other one is how do you use agency. Disruption of agency is a trigger of threat, and it's really quite profound. We like to be in charge of our own body, and we like to be at least have enough control of what's going on around us. For me, agency is this notion of it's having control, and loss of control is a trigger for anyone wanting to become scared or defensive. That's why people get frightened of anesthesia. They don't like masks put over their face. They don't want, they want to be awake. They want to be there. And this is buried into our nervous system of our own, I would say, our own surveillance of who we are. And the way that you give that up is through trusting the other. And so if you're already a, quote, what you're calling stressed out person, or a person, in my terminology, in the state of chronic threat, how do you even go under anesthesia? How do you trust the physician? How do you feel safe enough to put your body in the hands of another if you can't even allow your body to be in a hug of another? And we have this conceptualization of disease as something that we fight, and when we use the term fight, we're talking more about sympathetic aggressiveness, as opposed that we understand, and almost like we welcome disease so we can understand it, and then we can reject the disease because we no longer need it, or our body can reject it. I think the agency that we're missing is the agency of what the body does on its own. So the body is really an organ of self-healing and regeneration, and we have given those attributes to treatments outside the body, to the physician, to surgery, and to pharmaceuticals. And we've neglected to understand what the body can do for itself if it's not under a state of threat. So when our bodies are under external threat, then the ability to deal with internal threat or illness becomes compromised. And we always hear these stories of people who have diseases that get worse when they're under, quote, stress, and then they miraculously heal when they are in loving situations and feel supported. And it's not like these are unusual. It's like that's how the body works. So the body wants the agency to heal itself, but it can only take that agency when the context is a safe context, so that the nervous system doesn't have to go to states of defense.
So let's create a modern situation, is that people are going back to work soonish. We don't know when that exactly is. And many companies are suggesting a 3-2 model, 3 days in person, 2 days at home, or some flex system. That being said, is that if people are chronically stressed, is if they're under a chronic state of threat, which the pandemic certainly has amplified, but also I'm not sure that many of us have had the skills to to be able to properly regulate our nervous system prior to the pandemic. So it's
Yeah.
like it accelerated this awareness that, hey, we're barely managing chronic stress before, and now it's like spilling over. Okay, so we're going to go back to work. We're the conditions is that most people have a heightened state of chronic stress. We're going to go back into a work environment. We haven't seen people. We're not sure who's caring, who's not, if it's safe, if it's not. And we also have the pressures that come with high stress work environments, high pressured environments. And so, how would you suggest that when people go back into work, that if companies are trying to solve for agency and they're trying to solve for good working environments, where would you begin to guide companies to say, hey, this is how you'll take care of your people so that they have agency, so they can do their best work, so they can downregulate accordingly to work together properly?
Okay, so the first thing that tends to be missing in the whole treatment and even public health treatment towards the pandemic is the need of humans for social interaction. So we misuse terms like we use the word social distancing uh, when we really mean physical distancing. So the first thing is we have to maintain social relationships. That's what our bodies are really crying for. And that's how his history of humanity, that's how people mitigated their stress or threat reactions, was through interactions with others. Now, a lot of people like to go to work, and no one's asked the question, um, why did they like to go to work? It's always like, this is a drain. I could work from home. I get more done. But a lot of people like to go to work to see their colleagues. They like the social engagement behaviors. So if we're going to a 3-2 or a 2-3 or some hybrid model, where are the people getting their social interaction? It's been a remarkable experience. I've used the term cold turkey, and I'm going to talk about myself for a moment, because I was, giving talks in places at least once a month and really enjoying the travel. And then my last talk was a year ago last March. It was when the pandemic hit New York City, and I was talking in New York City, and I was giving people hugs, and I said, well, I'll do it tonight or today, but in a month I'll think about it. By the time we got home, uh, places were already shutting down. And interestingly, we went to dinner with friends of mine, and there were 4 couples. There were 8 of us at dinner. 3 people of those 8 had COVID by Monday. So it was like it was really close. We didn't get it. I don't know if I was just asymptomatic or immune, but I wasn't taking any chance. And the issue was it was very hard in the beginning. And then it became very hard to see people. And we've had our shots, and I've gone to restaurants, but I get exhausted in the presence of other people. So my nervous system retuned. And this I don't view as healthy. So, in a sense, not that I think of myself as a stressed out person, but obviously there's been some subtle retuning of how I respond to other people. So it's where people become a threat. And this is really I have difficulty figuring this one out because I have no fear about getting infected. I have a fear about being around people. Not fear, I have a discomfort. So it's this whole uh, experience of the pandemic has had a traumatic impact. So, but your question is much more targeted. It's saying in the real world where people go to work to make a living, they have to, so that they're not food insecure, home insecure. It's extraordinarily important. And many people, for many, the pandemic has made them food and home, and basically their families are insecure from that. And so they have this whole other layer where they need a job. And jobs are not just about getting money. I mean, it's important to have money. I'm not dismissing that as the substrate, but jobs have a history of being used to define who we are, how we express ourselves, and companies need to start thinking about how they can create a type of social networking, uh, whether it is a hybrid social networking or it's virtual. They need that level of interaction.
And so, how are we going to do it? Because if we start to thrust people who are, again, I'll use that language, sympathetic dominant, that their vagus nerve is not working quite properly.
The
It's not
information, the
mediating.
nerve works, the information is
Yeah,
not
the
flowing through.
information's, yeah,
Not,
right.
yeah. The program's not been implemented because there's a different program that takes a higher priority, and that's a survival one. I'm under threat.
So what do we do? I mean, we're talking about enhancing recovery systems to
Yeah.
help ensure that people are sleeping, eating, moving,
Yeah.
thinking well. We are strong down the lane for optimism training, gratitude training, mindfulness work. We're teaching breathing training. Where else do you
I'm
go?
well, you age out. Is where you go. You just
Oh my God.
um,
Okay. Yeah.
okay. So, and I say that because as I'm getting older, the I would say the panic or the expectation gets tempered because you see patterns over time. And what you're seeing is a culture that is very bottom line oriented. So, my life has been in universities. But universities, when I went into them, was the idea that they would have almost a church-like safety net, that you went there for scholarship, you went there to learn, and they would protect you as long as you did your service, you worked on your task. But they changed. They became grant oriented, bringing in money, and they became very pragmatic about what success was. And so
Mhm.
you adjust, and you become successful at what they want, and you still do what you want. But for many people, they didn't have that type of flexibility. And so you start creating within academics, in a sense, a poorly run business. And you have to approach it in a more integrated way about what is your real product. Your product is to change. If a university, from my perspective, when I entered it, it was to change the world, make the world a better place. I mean, these are simple statements people hear, but many of us went into that as our quote calling because we thought that would be a home that would allow us to be expressive and creative to make the world better. And over the years, this was very, let's say, gradually and more quickly adjusted to how much grant money did you bring in? You know, so it became, in a sense, a business model. So the question now is, these very successful businesses, can they take a different model? Because you can't go back to the universities and say the universities have figured it out. The universities mimicked the big corporations. They paid their upper administrators big bucks, and they squeezed on the younger faculty, and they pushed out uh, salaries were even in, basically, there's an underlying indexing, not that anyone will really tell you this, based on discipline. So if the disciplines are more likely to bring in grant money and are more competitive, or another university would want you get a better salary than if you're in the humanities. So actually on television this morning, it was Howard University was closing their classics department, and it was triggering a major reaction across the country, because what is it to be an educated person is to understand the history of what it is to be a human. Uh, so I'm just saying that universities have kind of lost their mandate and have had a similar mandate to businesses, in which management is well paid and workers are replaceable. Several years ago, I did a interview for Fast Company, and it was about working for reptiles or working for mammals. And in a sense, a organization that is reptilian oriented treats its workers as replaceable. A organization that is mammalian oriented supports its youth, enables them to develop. So you start getting a more family structure. And what I'm really saying is universities as well as companies became very reptilian oriented because they just really wanted uh, productivity in terms of numbers and cash flow. And we have to take a more, I'm going to say, a deep ethical view of corporate and institutional responsibility. And what I'm really saying is much has to be thought about in terms of the development of human beings within the workplace. And there is a Hebrew word called avodah, which is the Hebrew word for work, but the actual translation of it is sanctification through work. And if we thought of work as sanctification, as a personal experience, an expression of who we are, then work would be more than someone buying our hours.
What a cool word.
Yeah, at least that's my recollection of what it is. But it changes things because I get up in the morning and I look at people or listen to people, watch the news, people are interviewed, or now that I get out a little bit, I see the jobs that people do, whether they're dentists or physicians, the people I will see, or they work in clerical positions like the grocery store. And I ask myself, could I have handled an hourly job? Could I, even being, let's say, an accountant or a dentist or a physician, could I deal with that type of day-to-day interaction? And and compared to what my life has become, which is a life of ideas and interaction and trying to understand the human condition. So I've, in a sense, gone through my own journey. Now, I did, quote, work hourly at times, and jobs and teaching and a variety of other things. But what is it that I really want to do? And what does the working as we is a used human resource, how we constrain it? Are we interfering with the creativity and productivity of what it is to be a human? And that's what's reverberating in my mind. And what you're asking me is, what is the role that companies could play in enabling people to feel safe in the work environment that will enable them to be bolder and more creative and the products more worthwhile?
Amen. Because we talk about growth mindset and agency and great culture, and those are good psychological terms. But when people's physiology um,
Yeah.
is dysregulated in a way that they're sympathetic dominant, you cannot have a growth mindset if you are if your
Well, yeah, but
vagus, the polyvagal
yeah,
theory is
yeah,
truly inact. Right.
yeah. Okay, but we have to step back from that
Mm-hmm.
statement because that statement has embedded a lot of evaluation.
Okay.
Okay. And so if I were listening to you tell me that and I was a person in a sympathetic state, it wouldn't go down well
Right.
because my body is in a state of threat and it's the agency of not being in threat. I don't have that. I don't have that control. So now I'm being blamed for being who I am now.
Mm.
And that's the toughie. So the issue is, how do we witness? This is where the compassion comes in. How do we hear the voice of the other? And in witnessing, what happens to the voice of the other? Does the voice of the other start to, does the threat start to dissipate as a good witness is supportive and basically expresses true compassion without trying to fix or change the individual?
So here is a detection of threat. I don't know what you're talking about. Voice goes up, it's a little bit louder,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Or it becomes something like this and there's nothing in it. That's a highly stressed person as
yeah,
well, right? Where there's lack
right.
of sing song to it.
Well, yeah, but you see, don't take that as a voluntary behavior. Take it as a reflection of that physiological state.
That's
Be
right.
polyvagal informed for a moment. Okay. So the voice is projecting the state of the other. Now, if you understand that that person's voice and facial expressivity is that of stressed out or in a state of threat, and you want that person to move out of that state, how do you do that? You do that by witnessing, by listening, by inviting the person to tell their story, to have them do some breathing and have them share what they're feeling as they do the breathing, as they now literally go into a journey into their body and experience these different physiological states. Are these states frightening to them? They may be, because uh, immobilization or calmness might be vulnerability. They will share.
That sounds like therapy, not
That is
what
therapy.
right, which is not what a trained manager or director is even capable of doing, because
Well, you're
there's a dilemma set up there.
not necessarily. Let's say they're
Hmm.
intuitive people
Hmm.
always are good managers. Some people are what I call super co-regulators. Their presence
I
enables
love this.
others
Yeah.
feel good. Oh, you're pretty good yourself. You're probably a super co-regulator in
Yeah.
settings. People say, look, I meet you, I just feel much better. I can tell you these things. I feel good. I don't have to be like that. Now, their managers should do that. As I was telling you, aging out of systems, I am really tired of hearing that people will grow into positions, whether it's a chairman or a dean or a college president. Listen, no one grows into those positions. They either have the capacity, capabilities of being a good witness, a good co-regulator, or they don't. You can send them to these special workshops for university administrators. They'll come back just with some scripts and spreadsheets and questionnaires, but they're the same person. Uh,
I think you just got there somewhere that I wasn't able to get to, which was co-regulators and internal capabilities. So I'm
yeah,
down the path on internal capabilities, right? Like
yeah,
I even will say, like, that's your responsibility as being a human, is to have these capabilities and put them in place. And sometimes people that are sympathetic dominant don't want to hear that. But then,
yeah.
if we can do it and come at that conversation in many ways,
I
I think
would,
it's
I would, I would temper it. I would say it's your responsibility to be aware of the state that you're in.
oh yeah. Okay, good. I mean, I'm coming at it with a little fire right now. I
Yeah,
appreciate you. Yeah, I
yeah,
appreciate you there. And then,
yeah,
but the other piece that I wasn't able to get to was being a co-regulator. So if you want to create an environment with high agency, with proper creative thinking, with proper memory expression, with proper witnessing of others and the collaboration required to do the extraordinary, we need to be co-regulators,
yeah,
super co-regulators.
yeah.
That's cool.
You're basically welcoming, you're witnessing, welcoming, and appreciating. I mean, you're learning how to be a supporting person to support
Mm-hmm.
others. If we go back to really where our dialogue started, and that is, what is our biological imperative? Our biological imperative is to be connected with others. That's how mammals survived, and we're a social species. Uh, Not to, in a sense, be self-regulated, because what we've learned is that self-regulation is derivative of being co-regulated. So a good parenting model supports the child. The child becomes bold and doesn't need to be parented. They can just run off. But they have in their head these images of love, unconditional support. And when you start dealing with families that are so aggressive and disruptive, where children are removed by family services, and then you try to work with those children, you learn that the children have no visual image of that safety of a mother holding them. So they're very hard to work with, and their outcomes become very risky.
Even more challenging that our social mores don't allow us to hug and touch, and in work environments, barely even in therapy. Like there's a thing that, like, you got to be careful, how you
Yeah,
touch. And so, and it's such a powerful, because of the afferent nerve, and right, it's such a powerful stimulus.
it's really quite remarkable. And actually, I've had some, you know, uh, being around for a number of years and basically talking about the theory uh, uh, gives people create their own image of who I am or I might be. And for some people, it serves, let's use the term, a useful archetypical expression of a male that's not threatening to them. So when I give talks, people will come up and ask me questions, but often they'll download their history, which often is really they've had a trauma history, and they'll share it with me in a very few words, and I'll look at them and I'll smile at them, and I'll ask them if they'd like a hug. And I would say universally they say yes, I'd like a hug. And I give them a hug. And I've gotten emails back from women who said, "You're the first male that I let give me a hug in 20 years." And what that
Mm.
is really saying to me, their body, they wanted hugs, but their body was not safe enough. But I was safe enough for them to enable them to experience that. And, if that, puts a smile on my face, it's like saying, what a wonderful experience to be able to share a moment with someone to make them feel better about who they are and also about who I am. It's very nice. So there's an important point here. One is people want to be connected. And number two, the body, in a way, gets in the way of them being connected because their body says this is dangerous. It sends the cues and their body goes into these states,
So,
defensiveness.
so Stephen, are you saying there's two mandates from the brain? One is threat detection, safety. Let's call it threat detection for
Yeah.
more simplicity. And then the second is to be connected with others. Are those the two mandates of the
The
brain?
two, well, let's modify, let's put something in the middle.
Okay.
Okay. And let's say we're threat detectors. That's neuroception of threat,
Mm-hmm.
but a neuroception of safety, which downregulates the threat. And so you can have that threat response, but if you get the cues of safety, like the woman who said, "Yes, I'd like a hug," she got cues of safety from my presence. Then her defenses to fight and to become rigid, as opposed to having a conforming hug, she was able to give me this hug, which was just wonderful. And so that's kind of like there are two parts: threat, everything; turning off threat, special. And if you can turn off threat, then you can connect. You can't connect unless you can turn off threat.
Okay, but is it a primary mover to want to connect? Because it is a primary mover to detect threat.
Oh, it all depends on where in evolution you're raising turning the
Uh,
clock or the flag. It
mhm.
is the primary mover of social species is to connect. So our biological imperative is to connect.
Okay.
And I'll even give a little more on this. And in the world of therapy, people talk about all the successful clients they have. They're so successful in the world and they're in for therapy. And the problem is, how do we define success? And so, if you want to know what the primary mover is, it's whether you have good relationships. The people who have lots of money, I mean, billionaires now, and there are a lot of billionaires now, they are not necessarily successful people, and because they don't have relationships. We can say they're workaholics, they're this, they're that, or they're on spectrum. We can come up with all kinds of narratives, but you can ask them basically, if you want to say, "Are you successful?" They will probably say, "Miserable."
Yeah. Okay. I'm with you. All right. I like that as those prime drivers that we're talking about, the social connection as well as
Yeah,
threat detection. And this is why I think one of the reasons why optimism training, gratitude training, mindfulness work,
yeah,
breathing has been so powerful is
yeah,
because it's helping to down regulate and actually damp down the threat response.
yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
So if you use this notion of biological mandate to connect
Hmm.
as the driver, we want to connect. And to connect, we downregulate our defenses through cues of safety. Then you have the model.
There it
So
is.
cues of safety so we go back to even to the corporate world. If we want a synergistic workforce that is generative, that creates new products, creates new ways, innovations in product development, then we create this type of, going back to the word agency, we allow movement. So again, this is the notion again about, quote, keeping people in their place. Uh, uh, the agency to move, to succeed, to become better at, is part of what is built into humans. They want to explore, they want to create, and they want to connect. I don't think, I actually have this kind of belief that as you feel more secure through your connections, you become bolder, which means more creative.
I love it. Did you go in that order? Explore, connect, create?
I've always been an explorer and always been a
Yeah.
creator, but I also was an aware person, and I still mentor junior faculty, and I tell them you have to feed the beast. Know where you're working. So feeding the beast in the university setting is you need to publish, you need to get grant money, and these are the rules. It doesn't mean that you can't be creative, but you have to understand the rules. So it says, basically conform, or at least establish yourself following the rules. You can leverage them to do amazing things. So that's my model. My model was uh, be aware of where you are and attempt to navigate. It's not going to be perfect. Work environments are not perfect. And your goals in life may not always map into the work environment, but you need to think about how you can leverage this to do things. So, in my own personal life, my own journey, uh, as an academic, I first identified what was the most frustrating thing to be an academic, and that was the translation of ideas into practice. And that came at the end of my career. And because I had to leverage 40 years or plus, I started off, I was an assistant professor in 1970, so I have a long history here. And so I remember when my son was starting college, it was like 30, I remember it was 35 years of being a faculty member. And he came into my office and he said, you're really excited. I said, yeah, I'm really excited because I am I'm implementing one of my ideas into a practice model. He said, how long did it take you? I said, 35 years. Yeah, you have to be not just patient, you have to be persistent, and you have to understand the system that you're working in. And it's a long, for people with academic mindset, it's a long road, but you have to maintain your dreams and you have to, since, overcome those frustrations. And I feel in overcoming those frustrations, meaning translating the ideas into practice,
And is that the
into
safe and sound protocol?
that's one of the things. Yeah, I have some other patents and other things. Yeah, yes, but that's impacting on thousands of people, and you can sit back and say, "Wow, this is really remarkable." You get these emails from parents and families of transformative experiences, and you say, "Oh, what a wonderful." This is wonderful that you're able to see your work do something positive, and it fits not only the work being helpful, but the work fits the theory. The work would never have occurred if the theory wasn't there. So it's like a discovery of basic principles of what the body requests to be safe. And that's what the acoustic stimulation is. It's a computer alteration of vocal music, amplifying cues of safety. And to see it work is just an amazing thing. It's all, each time it happens, it's like this big, smile, and I can't believe it's happening.
So
So
this could definitely, you've got some research around, or some evidence around, I think it's autism and ADD and maybe some other conditions. But do you also, and maybe describe it for folks who aren't
yeah,
familiar with it?
well, the way, okay, since again, if when you're an academic, you try to find the language of an academic, you try
Right.
to let it
Yeah.
fit in. I mean, functionally, basically listening to music through headphones that's computer altered has these remarkable effects. But why? It's because it's basically a neuromodulation intervention in which the feedback of listening to these acoustic sounds acts like an acoustic vagal nerve stimulator. So in a sense, you're stimulating this calming vagus through sound, and the
Through
neural
the middle
circuits.
ear. Through the middle
Well,
ear.
through recruiting the middle ear,
Right. Mm-hmm.
and this was again, so like this was a disruption to how the speech and hearing scientists wanted to see their system. So even though it works that way, you can just say, well, we all understand that music calms the person. Okay. What does calming mean? It means that the ventral vagus is coming on board. And when that system comes on, the neural regulation of the middle ear muscles is part of that ventral vagal circuit. So, and the faces light up. You see these upper face smiling. So you can see the circuit going on. And getting emails from people. One person was using it with his daughter who was diagnosed with schizophrenia. She's now down, she's back in school and her drugs are down 50%. You're getting these stories that are just remarkable. Uh, and we're doing a pilot study with uh, a joint mobility disorder called Ehlers-Danlos hypermobility, and
Mm.
that is double jointedness, and they have a lot of visceral pain. And we're starting a pilot study using the sound stimulation to deal with chronic pain in that group. And we're doing a chronic pain with people with back pains, and we're doing a project with people with Parkinson's now to see if that will alleviate some of the symptoms.
And is this essentially a way to downregulate?
It's a way of recruiting that ventral vagus, which means to downregulate our defenses. And what happens with that is it becomes, even in terms of inflammatory disorders, it downregulates inflammation. It's sending cues to your autonomic nervous system. Everything's okay, calm down. And that inhibits inflammation in others.
And so this is a time sensitive protocol, meaning that there's a certain amount of time that we do it, and the
It,
timing of it
it,
matters.
it's interesting. It started off as a 1 hour program, 1 hour a day. And then when we start to kind of go into this clinical world of people with trauma histories and mental health histories, it started to be titrated and with clinicians, and sometimes it may be a half hour a week. And so they progressively go through it based upon the client. And then they might not just do the 5 hours. They may wait a week or two and do another 5 hours and keep going like that. It's like exercise. I even call these things neural exercises. So if your body hasn't recruited these neural circuits, the recruiting of it can be extremely exhausting. And so you titrate it and the body kind of resolves and gets used to it. And then you can expand the duration of the intervention.
What do you think of binaural beats?
I don't know too much about that. So
Hmm.
it was never the world I'm in. And also, I haven't focused on rhythms or different types of music. I was using music that was conveying cues of safety, meaning that the frequency band was always going to be that of a uh, a mother's lullaby. So
Hmm.
I had basically a model beforehand. It doesn't mean that these other things can't be helpful. And so as mother's lullaby is the cue, the physiology is that, or say the neuroanatomy is that the transfer function of the middle ear structures of mammals. That means if I put sounds outside the ear, what gets into the inner ear, that is actually based on the physics of the middle ear structure. So all mammals have a frequency band of social communication based on the size of the middle ear structures. So we could actually make non-human mammalian acoustic interventions as well.
And would you is it, so it's not the hardware, it's the music that you've chosen
Yeah.
for
Well,
this
it's the
protocol.
frequency band. It's not even the music.
It's not the
So
music. Yeah.
I remember when I was developing this, some child wanted to hear a boys band, and we had NSYNC, and we filtered that, and it had good effect as well. We kind of standardized it to more female vocal music because it's more comfortable. We're also going to go back and create an instrumental version because some of the vocal songs have lyrics that are triggers to people from different cultures, and we're trying to make it more universal.
And can you drive? Is before we tell people where to go buy and get it, is this just for licensed folks, or
It's for,
can anyone buy
yes,
it?
it's not a consumer product. And
Yeah.
there's good reason. And that is as we moved into the applications in the world of trauma, uh, it started to have some interesting unpredicted reactions, which makes sense now, but didn't when I started. That is, people start getting very anxious and had some destabilization, in the sense their sympathetic fight flight came in, and that's because cues of safety were now cues of threat because they had been violated when they felt safe with someone. So the system remembered those bodily feelings of being accessible, but those were now triggers. So with trauma-informed therapists, they kind of like allow the person to touch those feelings and then to become more comfortable and resolve it. And then the power of them as being destabilizers disappear. So the providers are licensed practitioners in different disciplines.
Could healthy individuals benefit from this if under the guidance of a psychologist or licensed professional, like an athletic team?
Well, we are doing a pilot study in Germany with team. Actually, it's going to be the German Olympic team listening to this to, in a sense, enhance recovery after training, daily trainings. So we think about it as cues to enable the body to relax and to recover after the strenuous exercise. It may be a facilitator of training. So the idea is that the body knows what homeostasis is. So it knows how to, in a sense, self-heal and regulate itself. The issue is it also knows that it's often in context of threat. And when it detects context of threat, what does it do? It turns off its homeostatic functions, therefore would interfere with its recovery cycle.
There you go. And also impairs digestion as well, which is one of the
Yeah.
big
Well,
drivers for recovery.
but the interesting thing, you inhibit digestion when you're mobilized.
That's
It's
right.
the natural reaction. So the sympathetic nervous system turns off subdiaphragmatic organs. You know, that's
Yeah.
obvious. Now the question is, when do you want to give the cue to your enteric system that everything's okay? And that comes from the ventral vagus. So the ventral vagus doesn't regulate your gut, but it tells your gut, everything's okay, do your
It's
job.
okay. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's okay. Absorption and digestion. I should get both of those in
yeah,
there.
yeah.
Okay. You must be having just a field day with heart rate variability and the wearables that are tracking, well, I guess what would be a downstream effect from the vagus nerve, but you must be like just having a field day with this right now.
Well, you have to know my full history because I'm the guy that published the first study on heart rate variability in the
Yeah.
60s.
Yeah.
So
No, I do know
so
that. Yeah.
and so that was the journey. The journey to polyvagal theory came from measuring heart rate variability to try to figure out what it was, what it meant, why.
1964, right?
60, no, not that
Oh.
old, 69.
Oh, okay.
but
I
but
thought I
close.
read your first paper on polyvagal was 64. So
No,
69. Okay.
no, 69 was the first one. Heart rate variability, polyvagal as a word, is first published in 1995.
Yeah.
Uh, so the answer is yeah. It's both exciting, interesting, and a little bit disappointing because many people lost uh, the focus of why heart rate variability is useful and important, and that it's a physiological response that carries with it a neural component. That is an accurate measure of that ventral vagus, but you have to know how to extract it appropriately because it is a mathematical or the psychometric challenge to get that. It's a signal processing challenge to get that component out.
Mm. So you're saying that the G1 generation 1 measurement tools need some tooling.
I think that people have focused on, in a sense, the sensors and not on the extraction of the neural component. And I wrote about a year and a half ago, I was awarded a patent on extracting of neural signals from physiology, from physiological signals, in which the patent describes exactly this sequence of how to do this. First of all, I didn't think it was patentable. What I realized when the patent examiner says, he says, basically, no one has done this before. No one has extracted or written a patent about extracting neural signals from physiology.
Neural
Which,
signals. So
The
this
neuro
is tone, like vagus
vagal
tone.
tone, but there are other things you can extract as well.
Oh,
So
mm.
you know, based upon how you approach the signal. And so I got a patent on that, and I also got a patent on how to use that signal in a closed loop feedback model. So where one could actually change environment based upon physiological state. Uh,
So this is not a tool that is reading, but a tool that is actually an intervention.
there are two parts. The one that reads it, and that's what I was calling the neurometrics,
That's the neurometrics.
and then that becomes a signal to another regulator that can change the context for stimulation.
Have you
And
seen have you seen what Apollo Neuro is doing? Have you tracked their technology?
uh, actually, the name is ringing a bell. What is their device?
It's a device that is you put it on your wrist predominantly, but it's a sound slash vibration
Oh yeah,
that.
yeah, I
Mhm.
know, I know. Yeah, it's supposed to. Those vibrations are supposed to have a vagal impact as well. I
Mhm.
don't know. I have to look more carefully at. Someone sent me the link.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, and I'm happy to connect you with them or some research or whatever.
Hmm,
The research is interesting and promising, and
hmm.
I notice it, a
Oh,
down-regulated effect when I wear it. And
good.
so, yeah, from an N of one. But their research is really interesting and promising.
Hmm.
So they've got something there. But it sounds like so your next step is to build out that product.
Well, it's two parts of it. I'm starting to build out part of the metric side because I now have a new metric called vagal efficiency, which is
Mhm.
really the assessment of that feedback loop of that vagal tone to the heart and how the heart will actually change. So if you have low vagal efficiency, you can change that vagal component of the heart rate, and it's going to have little impact or little predictable impact on your heart rate. So from a coaching model, especially with athletes, you want very efficient vagal tone. You want the signal to be able to be retracted to get the metabolic output rapidly and then to be put back on to calm down. So it's assessed during simple posture shifts. So we have supine, seated, and standing. So there's no psychological component. And we get really a range of individual differences. And trauma history is greatly related to having lower vagal efficiency. And if you want to take a metaphor, vagal efficiency is a metaphor for the feedback loop of the brain regulating your cardiovascular system. And with stresses or traumas, you start to dampen that regulation. And then over time, the end organ, in this case, the heart or other visceral organs, are not being regulated through the autonomic nervous system so tightly. So then the surveillance system of your autonomic nervous system is not sending cues that are having great impact on the organs. And so you have end organ disease. So this now provides the explanation of how you can have a progressive deterioration of feedback loops in the body that would lead to organ dysfunction. And I think this measure, vagal efficiency, is going to map very nicely into dysautonomia, which became a disorder that no one knows what it is. And I think it really means the feedback loops of the autonomic nervous system aren't working. I started this first study I did in 1999, and then I resurrected the measure 2 years ago with preterm babies and was able to show maturation of it and the impact of a preterm intervention on it. And then we did a study with vagal nerve stimulation on the ear, and we're able to detect individuals in which the intervention would work to reduce gut pain. So it's we're having fun with that one. That one,
Oh,
that one's going to be available in the device within, I hope, 6 months. So,
whatever I can do to support your
yeah.
efforts there, because I think the world needs what you're creating right now.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. What a treat. I've read your work for a long time. I've referenced you in so many lectures and talks, and you've been in my consciousness. You know,
Oh,
your work has been for decades. And so to have this conversation with you, I hope that we've done justice to your insights, because they're profound and they're disruptive and materially important for the quality of people's lives. So not only performance, but flourishing in general. So I just want to say thank you. And
Thank you. Thank you, Mike. I think when we think about ideas, especially thinking about polyvagal theory, I think of it merely as the solving a Rubik's Cube puzzle in which other people basically create all the foundations, and I was able to turn the puzzle and come up with a organizational model, and that if that fits the intuition of good observers. So if the polyvagal theory didn't explain your own experiences, it would not be useful to you. And to me, it's always a remarkable treat to hear that it has explanatory use.
oh,
So,
yeah,
so
for sure it does. Yeah. And then, we didn't get to the skills, but they're not complicated. It's like there's a couple interesting ones, but like we talked about meditation and breathing. We talked about optimism training, sleep, gratitude training. But we didn't talk about sex as one of the vagus nerve modulators, including the coming on board of oxytocin. But we also didn't hit gargling as something that people don't talk about, but it's actually a vagal stimulant. Do I have that right?
yeah, yeah, humming is too.
Humming too.
Ch- Chewing gum, ingestion.
Swallowing.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, so listen, if I can be a resource in anything that you're doing, I'd be honored to. And I just, again, thank you for the brilliance and the contributions you've made to the field of science and so many people that want to live a meaningful, healthy life.
Well, thank you, Michael. My closing word is really that is an optimistic one, and that is even though we can be retuned to be defensive, we can recover and be retuned to be optimistic and connected. So thank you for inviting me to join you.
All the best.